Combat Commander video number 5, carrying on with firing. So we're going to look at first, we're going to look at some defensive bonuses that you get. As ever, you've got the wonderfully useful player aid sheet that comes with the game, and on the back of that you've got the terrain chart, and the terrain chart will tell you what bonuses you will get to your morale for the various cover that you're in. So for example here we've got the line squad shooting at the Volksgrenadier squad. The Volksgrenadier squad, I'll just move the units out of the way, is in a building, and if we look on the terrain chart that says that they get 3, so they get a cover of 3 which would be added to their defense total. So their defense total at the moment would be their morale of 7 plus whatever dice roll they've got plus the cover of 3. Woods, so if I move them around, if the line squad was firing when they're in the woods would give them a cover of 2. Fairly straightforward, no real problems there. Interestingly, when somebody's on a road, they would get a cover of -1s, which would actually be negative, which would reduce their defense total. So being on a road, although you do get the road bonus when you're moving, it does reduce your defense. Being in the orchard there gives you a cover of 1, which should add 1 to your defense. It's all in the terrain chart, fairly easy to check. Another thing to talk about is hex side terrain, and this only counts if the shot's actually crossing the hex side as it goes into the defender's hex. As we'll see later, the wall, if the wall was like here, say for instance, it would actually block line of sight, but when it's there, it does give the, for a wall it would give them a cover of 2. They would also get the other type of defensive bonuses, what's called a hindrance. Now some terrain, rather than blocking line of sight, some terrain blocks line of sight, like woods, buildings, we'll talk about that in a minute, but other terrain hinders line of sight. So if the trace of the line of sight, if I just show you the line of sight, when we're drawing line of sight, it's quite similar to a lot of games. You draw from the center dot of the firer's hex to the center dot of the target's hex, and as we can see it goes through the orchard, which if you look in the terrain chart it gives you a hindrance to line of sight of 2. And what hindrances do is that they reduce the firepower of the firing unit. So in this case the line squad would have their attack total reduced by 2, they'd have their firepower reduced to 4 because of the orchard, and the Volksgrenadier squad would get a bonus of +2 to their defense total because of the wall. So it probably wouldn't work out to be a very high percentage shot. With hindrances, they're not cumulative, and you basically have to pick the highest single hindrance to act as the negative modifier to your opponent's firepower. Doesn't matter if there's lots of hindrance hexes between you and the target. So in this situation here, the hindrance would still only be a 2. Doesn't matter that there's 3 orchard hexes between me and them, it's still a hindrance of 2, hindrance of 2, hindrance of 2. It's just a hindrance of 2. You take the highest one, they're all the same, doesn't matter, they're not cumulative, you just have to take the single greatest hindrance. So essentially that would be the same defensive modifiers as for the other shot. You get a hindrance of 2 reducing the attacker's firepower by 2, and you would get a bonus of +2 either for the woods or the wall. That brings us to another point. When we're choosing cover as well, we can only choose one, the best cover we can have. The cover's not cumulative either. So in this case it doesn't make a difference because the wall gives you a 2, the woods gives you a 2, so you're going to have a cover of 2 either way. However, if I was perhaps shooting this time, you could get a cover of 2 for the wall, but as you'll see the Volksgrenadier squad's actually in a building, so they would actually have a cover of 3. If it's not a cover of 5, you don't add them together, they would have to choose either the building or the wall, and I think most sensible people would choose the building because it's a higher cover. So let's talk a bit about line of sight then. As we can see in this case, it's quite clear that the line squad cannot see the Volksgrenadier squad because the line of sight, we get our taut piece of string or thread between the center hex of the firer to the center hex of the target. quite clearly goes through the forest hex, quite clearly goes through the forest depiction in that hex. And if we look, the woods, sorry, not forest, woods block line of sight. So that one is quite clear, no line of sight there. This one's not quite so clear. We probably would have to get our string or our thread out here. The line squad again, just in range, 6 hexes. Yep. Shall we check for line of sight? And as we can see, no, the wood does block line of sight because the line of sight thread is going through the depiction. You can quite clearly see that it touches it, so that line of sight also would be blocked. What do we think about this one? Well, again, not obvious, but usually when you're dealing with this kind of situation, we can look down the what's called a hex spine down there. So I think this probably will be okay. Let's check. Yep. So as we can see, it doesn't. The block line of sight's not blocked. It's just that it would be the hindrance from the orchard and the cover from the wall. In this situation, the line of sight is going to be blocked by the wall. The rule for the walls is if the wall is part of the firer's hex or part of the target's hex, then it doesn't block line of sight. But if it's somewhere in between, if it's not part of either of those hexes, then it does block line of sight. So in this situation, the line of sight would be blocked by the wall. So it's pretty straightforward, the basic line of sight rules. However, it starts to get a little bit trickier when you're dealing with hills. I'd recommend that you give the hill rules a good few reading through, as it's probably as complex as Combat Commander gets. That's probably the most complicated bit of the whole game, and even that, you know, it's not too bad. But the basic way to think about hills is, if you're on what they call a crest line hex, then you can see down the hill, and because line of sight is reciprocal, you know, if I can see you, you can see me. You know, whatever's on the ground can see you straight back. So in this situation, the line squad would have line of sight to the Volksgrenadier squad because they're on the crest line hex, which is defined in the rules as having more than one level contained within the hex. So you can quite clearly see the crest line here. You know, part of this hex, that's where the crest line would be, down onto level 0. So you'd have, there's I think 4 or 5 different levels in Combat Commander. We can only see 4 in this particular map, but you've got the kind of the level 0 would be this colour. The sort of very light brown would be level 1, slightly darker brown level 2, and then the dark brown level 3, and then I think there's an even darker brown level 4. So if you're on the crest line, you can see down the hill. If the line squad was here, then these two squads would no longer have line of sight to each other, because the line squad is no longer on a crest line hex. It can't see to a lower elevation from there. If there was another hill here, a level 1 hill here, perhaps, say for instance, they would be able to see each other because they would then be on same level. They'd be on the same elevation level. So they would be able to see each other, but seeing downhill, they have to be on the cresting hex. So if the line squad was on this hex, then they would be able to see the Volksgrenadier squad, because they're on, if we look, they're on a cresting hex. There's the crest line, so they can see downhill, and they will be able to see the Volksgrenadier squad. There's nothing else blocking the line of sight, so they would be able to see downhill. Another thing to consider is blind hexes, which they're not too bad. They can be quite complicated in other games, but in Combat Commander not too bad. You can see into buildings from higher elevations, so the line squad here can see the Volksgrenadier squad that's in this building. But whenever you're looking at a building, it will create a single blind hex directly behind it that you can't see into. So if the Volksgrenadier squad was in this hex, it wouldn't be in line of sight because it would be in the blind hex created by this building. However, if the Volksgrenadier was here, that would be fine, because there's only one blind hex, only ever one blind hex created, and it would be line of sight would be clear after that.